So the Legendino has obviously got a coughing fit going on all the way in Brazil, and it's great. It's the first coughing fit I've heard from Rio. Certainly, I can't think of any other coughing fit that I've come across because usually the weather's so good there. There's nothing to cough about, is there?
Yeah, I think this is a combination of overwork and too many little dips in the sea.
Overwork.
Yeah.
You're a
God
football
blimey.
commentator. You're a flipping football
How many other people in the world were up until 2:30 Monday night and then up at 7
Overwork.
Tuesday
That's
morning?
not work. I mean, that's money for nothing.
Yeah, well, I tell you, there's no chicks for free.
Yeah, there's one word in that song that we're not going to use today. Anyway, by way of introducing our guest for today, friend of the program, of course, a podcaster of his own self and a broadcaster, and what else is he? Music critic. The great, legendary Mark Webster's with us. Hello, Mark.
Hello, lads. Nice to see you. I'm just trying to think what you and I might have caught, Dotun, if we went swimming off of the coast of Britain. And my suspicion, it would be something a lot more unfortunate than having a bit of a nasty cough.
Well, yeah. Thank you for bringing that into perspective.
Just leave you that thought on your mind.
You cough away, Tim. I don't even care if I catch it. Look, we're talking about a cracking match today. I think it's fair to say. FA Cup finals, you always remember them, don't you? Not least when your team is one of the two teams competing at Wembley, Mark.
Yeah, it was, and especially from my point of view, it just as luck would have it, and it really was luck because getting a ticket was fundamentally a genuine lottery for me. I'd been to Wembley once before with the school and I don't know if you'd ever done this, was when you could English schoolboys.
Yeah. Yeah. That was my first game.
Exactly. And so the stadium was full of schoolboys watching England schoolboys, which was and Paul Rideout was in the game that I was watching, who had a really big career with Everton. And for that particular game, and it's kind of my two memories of it are this one first and then the cup final, is where we was towards the front behind the same goal I watched the cup final in. If you were at the front at Wembley, your head was pitch height because it was this weird dip below the surface. It's a very strange. It was like you were lying down watching a match.
You have a go at him, Webbo. You have a go at him. He's a member of this empire business.
Even before I became a member, I was a resident of Tottenham, as you know, and White Hart Lane, I seem to remember, certainly as a youngster, had a similar type of dip from the pitch. If you were sitting at the front row, you'd be head height level with the grass.
So strange.
A lot of football grounds did that. I don't know why. Any reasoning behind that, Tim? Can you think of any reason why they would have done that?
Pack, cheap.
It's so probably true, yeah.
I suppose
you can create more space. And, of course, where that bit would have been the bend on the speedway track as well and the greyhound. So if you were on the bend when a speedway bike was coming round, and the mud would have been flying straight into your chops. Lovely.
Mark, how old were you was it May the 3rd, 1975, when it's West Ham and Fulham in an all London FA Cup final that maybe left the rest of the country a little bit befuddled? How old were you at that time?
Flowers of pancake, as far as I can tell from other sources, yes. 14, third year at school.
Good age.
An aspiring 15-year-old, and a lot changes between 14 and 15, I discover, because I still look like, I don't think there's even quite a 14-year-old who thought about being a teenager properly at that stage. And I suppose I just need to reference the fact I was lucky enough to be there, and I worked with a fella called Derek Pryor, who's someone who used to go, one of the little clutch of people that used to come up from Ashford in Kent where we were living, to watch West Ham games. And we happened to go on a game prior to probably the semi-final, which we ultimately beat Ipswich in, which was somewhat of a surprise. And on the back of the programme, in the corner at the back of the programme, all the programmes had different numbers in like a little triangle at the back. And it was going to be your lottery ticket to win. And the fellow who came up with us, we lived at number 3, and Terry Watson lived at number 31. And Terry Watson come up, and he was an Arsenal fan, and he came in there, and he was not only an Arsenal fan, he was a Bruce Lee devotee.
Oh yeah, of course.
Had Bruce Lee's haircut as well, and believed that he could do kung fu. And he used to make he used to do all the noises, and he'd make the moves. And he chose on that day. I don't know at the shop. As an Arsenal player at the shot, and it's coming straight at us. We're near behind the goal. And he decides the sensible thing to do at that stage to punch the ball back, which he did, leaving himself with no skin on his knuckles, but also no capacity to show pain because he was a Bruce Lee devotee.
Of course, yeah.
But so poor old Terry had a bit of a nightmare. But where I got lucky is his program had a winning number, and he didn't care, so he gave it to me.
Game on.
And so I went up to West Ham one Sunday morning and queued up and bought the ticket because it was that high tech.
I've got a mate. I've lost contact with him now, but unfortunately, he was a lovely fella who was the morning. He was part of the junior It's a Knockout for Fulham and West Ham.
Wow.
Big claim to fame. He was at my age, so he was only 10 at the 9 or 10 at the time. Lovely fella. Played table tennis very well, and he was ranked in Surrey, which was unfortunate because he can't pronounce the letter R. So he was there. I don't know if he was at the game because he never told me about that. All he ever wanted to tell me about was being on the junior It's a Knockout in the morning.
So anyone would want to know about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what the event was. Just massive, wasn't it? It was huge.
Yeah.
It just took over the nation's life, especially in the London area for the build up of the week and then the big day. And the thing that makes this game really striking, I think, is it's all about one Robert Moore.
Yeah.
And his, I suppose, his loss of pace amongst other things, because he's not the same player, though, is he?
No, he's 34. Although he's such a mysterious character, I think, and I'm sure you do as well as a West Ham fan, especially Mark. I have an idolatry for Bobby Moore,
totally.
But you never quite feel that you know him. He's such a mystery, absolute enigma, I think, Bobby Moore. And not that long before, Brian Clough came down from Derby and he wanted him in the Derby team. He was going to build the way that he'd done with Dave Mackay a few years earlier.
Right.
He was going to build a new Derby team who were champions of England, semi-finalists in the cup, in the European Cup. He was going to build and West Ham wouldn't sell him. And see, this is one of the things that strikes out to me at this game. West Ham win. It's their second cup win. But how mediocre the club they were as a club. Where if you go back 10 years earlier, and when they won the cup in 1964, they looked to be on the dawn of something really special. And it's a game that we looked at, the Cup Winners' Cup final at Wembley against 1860 Munich in 65. And you can watch that today and it looks modern. You know, the quality of the football is just outstanding. And these players are coming through. And somehow it all tips into mediocrity. When Jimmy Greaves left, part exchange for Martin Peters. Yeah. When Jimmy Greaves left Tottenham to go to West Ham in, was it 69, 70? He couldn't believe how slovenly West Ham was. You know, he's thinking, I'm going to the academy, you know, the great coaching, Ron Greenwood, John Lyall. And they're all on the piss all the time. And I think, and I've had a few of these conversations with West Ham fans, that the key thing that goes wrong is Bobby Moore. It's the relationship between Ron Greenwood and Bobby Moore. Ron Greenwood is the manager, obviously. Now, in those days, it's tough for the managers because the managers have to negotiate the contracts as well.
Yeah.
And this is one thing that you can never... I'm glad I'm on the other side of the Atlantic from Mark Webster at the moment, because Moore wanted away.
Yes, he did.
66, he was joining Tottenham.
Yeah.
And then England win the World Cup. And there's no way that West Ham's going to let him go because he's their big asset.
Well, I think you're trying to get out before the World Cup as well. Yeah. I mean, because he's basically, his career was hung in front of him and saying, if you don't sign for us again, because I think perhaps the one thing that we do know about Bobby Moore is the tragic part of his life is that it never really worked for him. It never worked for him outside of the field of play. You know, his financial investments never happened.
Nothing works.
His career as a manager didn't happen. And as you say, possibly, I would go as far. I of course would go as far to say the most iconic of all England footballers, because I guess being the captain of the 1966 team would help you be that. But I think most of the most talented football he's ever seen. Has there ever been a more striking image than him and Pele hugging each other after the game in 1970? The greatest footballer on the planet hugging the man that he thinks has just had one of the best games of football against him. I take all of that with me. And I take with me, Tim, quite happy to take with me the fact that poor old Bob was trying to make a living and West Ham seemed to squeeze him out of making a living. And that's why you end up with a Fulham team, second division team at the time, but aspirational, because ultimately they're getting George Best and Rodney Marsh in the game. But of course, alongside him at 4 is Alan Mullery, who started at Fulham, but was obviously a Tottenham man through and through. And so you had this kind of weird 4 and 6 walking out onto the pitch behind Alex Stock, who... And as you say, in their early 30s, in the 70s, you might as well have been 60.
Yeah,
you know,
34 was the old 60.
They were pushing their luck. And to be fair, Don, I would add, Bobby Moore didn't have a load of pace in the first place. So for him to lose pace was a problem. So,
and he's not the problem in the game. There are two.
No, strangely enough,
there were two key areas.
Where
West Ham, which we'll get onto in a minute, but still with Moore. So the relationship between Moore and Greenwood just breaks down. It just breaks down. They barely talk to each other, although they've got great respect for each other. But they're barely on speaking terms because poor old Greenwood has to negotiate the contract. So he's not giving Moore the away that he wants or the money that he wants. And Moore, and this is the thing I could never understand about him, because you read about him, and I've read loads about him. He's such a meticulous fella, really meticulous. Now, as a kid, you'll love this with your wonderful podcast, Clobbered. As a kid, Bobby Moore, he hung all his shirts up in his bedroom, going from lightest to darkest.
Oh,
all in. Now, everything about him was just absolutely meticulous. The mohair suits, just wonderful.
I always think he carried his haircuts in the same way that him and Michael Caine basically doppelgangered.
That's it.
From Harry Palmer through to Michael Caine heading up to Newcastle and then off to the States. But it's all the same thing, and they look. You're so right.
It's the same movement, isn't it? It's the same movement, but it kind of. I would argue that it went a little bit wrong for both of them, because I think all of Kane's best films are the ones up until Get Carter, and after that, he did this, he did this, he did this, he did this, but the iconic ones are earlier. But Moore, this meticulous fella, and also one of the things that comes across from his wives is what he had a very, very strong female side, very sensitive side. Love going out shopping, for example, at a time when for the majority of males, this is absolute torture. He loved it all. But also, what he really loves is lager with the lads. And he'd drink himself senseless.
Yeah.
His trick was, he had a trick. Always drink halves. So people are seeing you with a half glass. They don't really know how much you're. And I was reading about it this morning. There's one drinking session where him and his mate, they got through 20 pints each. That's and he's captain of England, for crying out loud. So, and I always think with Moore, and this is the tragedy of him staying at West Ham, because if you'd have given him big games every week, he'd have played big games every week. But I think he just took his foot off the pedal. And that, I think Moore was a fabulous captain of a good team and a dreadful captain of a crap team. Because when it's a good team and everyone's doing their job, he's just like the quiet, inspirational, quiet so-and-so. But when it's a team that's on the piss, he's not stopping them. He's not inspiring them. He's just going with the flow, And this, for me, is the tragedy of West Ham going into the 70s.
Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis, the way that Bron Greenwood and Bobby Moore kind of had to come to terms with the fact that they were symbiotically linked and nothing else could happen. And even though they're not necessarily right for each other, neither of them can think of a way out of the situation. And And you're right. If you look at that team, it's if you go highlights, at the time, Mervyn Day was absolutely going to be an England star forever. The curly-haired teenager who won Player of the Year. He played with his sleeves pushed up and no gloves. It's a remarkable kind of rock star figure. But Kevin Locke is the kid who's been brought in to replace Bobby Moore. A lot was expected of him, never quite happened. You had Frank Lampard in that side, who was and had a great career as a football player. Was unlucky not to get a lot more caps. And then you're kind of skipping up to Trevor Brooking and a bunch of fellas that, of course, are all part of my club's history, but aren't necessarily anything other than men in the middle of the journeyman world. Including, of course, the number 9, the one unusual thing you might say about the West Ham thing, or unique thing about that game and the situation, is that we played a very tiny number 9, which wasn't a normal in those days. He was still new to the club when Alan Taylor turned up.
He just come down from Rochdale, had he?
He had. Out of the league, fundamentally first, and then barely at Rochdale, yes.
Yeah, what you've both said so far has teed me up even more so for this game, because FA Cup finals don't come around every weekday. And this was a classic, partly because it's, when you watch it, you can see the whole game on YouTube. When you watch it, this is the old Wembley, the original Wembley, which has got a certain amount of magic and sound about it. And also, it allows you a certain amount of sense of humour in those days. And the first placard that we saw in glorious black and white on our TV screens was one that said West Ham 3, Dad's Army 0. And I think Dad's Army was a reference to the said Robert Moore, was it?
And Mullers, the two of them.
Yeah. I feel sorry for Adam Mullery, because I remember seeing him at White Hart Lane a few times. I spoke to him years later, and it brought tears to my eyes that he couldn't remember me. Of course, but I said, "Yeah, must do you know hear me say Mallory? Mallory." He couldn't remember that. But
he took a lot of stick from the Tottenham fans for a while, so he probably blinded it out.
I love the fact that he's personally responsible for the Brighton Crystal Palace club rivalry, which is an amazing thing. What a claim to fame, among other things.
Well, how
clubs he didn't really care about.
And how's he responsible for the rivalry? Because he played for both.
He said something. He'd gone from he said something extraordinarily disparaging, I think, about Palace while managing at Brighton. It was something like that. And either way, they managed to set 70 miles distance aside and make it feel like they were.
You can forget dark satanic Millwall. Our rivals now are.
And Millwall are still dark, and I'll leave the rest to your imagination. So the game starts off anyway. I think quite excitingly, lots of chances, but no goals in the first half.
No, and one point to make here is I don't think any club had ever played as many minutes on their way to an FA Cup final as Fulham.
Yeah. No, amazing about the replays, didn't they?
Yeah. And was it 4 against Forest, who are by this time, this is the early days of Clough at Forest. So they go through loads and loads of, because it was written, wasn't it? West Ham go back to Wembley, and it has to be Bobby Moore that they're up against. So a few of them became folk heroes. And John Mitchell was full of gab, and he became a little bit of a media star. They were missing a player, one of the fullbacks, who was a really good fullback called Les Strong. He was injured, and that all it makes me feel so bad.
Because that's John Cutbush who makes the mistake at right back, isn't it?
Yes. And then West Ham, they spend the first half attacking the left back, Fraser, the reserve.
Yes.
And then at half time, the brains trust, Johnny Lyle and Ron, who's there now in a supervisory category. They say, why don't we have a look at Cutbush city limits?
Yeah. It's true. And that's where all the damage was done. It should be mentioned, of course, I failed to mention the fact that, of course, our captain was Billy Bonds.
Legend.
Right up there. And, of course, he speaks famously of the fact that for him, he couldn't believe he was having to play against Bobby Moore. But Les Strong's an interesting story in 2 levels. because he's still involved in the club now, and he works in the capacity of club ambassador and stuff like this, and has run their social club for many, many years. So just a few months ago, I joined very wisely the Brentford to Fulham leg of Kevin Day's famous All of London Football Club's charity walk. He'd done all the other ones. I came at the end and just did that one, which was great. I met Les Strong. And we have it, and he said, "Okay, where do you live?" I said, "Well, I'm in West London." He said, "I can give you a lift back. I live in Richmond." I said, "Okay, how long have you been there?" He said, "Oh, many years." He said, "I had a pub down there for ages." I said, "Right, what's that called?" I said, "The Belvedere Arms." I said, "There's a Belvedere Arms, which is basically where acid jazz music was. Yeah, it's heading in towards Richmond town centre, in fact."
Okay, yeah.
And I said there was a pub called Belvedere Arms where acid jazz was invented, because it's where Chris Bangs and Giles Peterson first played their music together. And Les said, "Oh yeah, I'll give Giles his big break." Les Strong invented acid jazz. I'll take that. Plus, also, his boot boy at the club, who joined, having been invited to go along and watch the game, was Tony Gale, who, of course, ends up as a West Ham legend, and, of course, a Blackburn, and winning the league title with Blackburn.
I have a Tony Gale story. He was rooming with his old centre-back partner, Alvin Martin. And Tony Gale was suffering from a little bit of the old Farmer Giles. This is important for the story. I don't put in this gratuitously.
Just floating his ailments around willy-nilly.
And so he had cream for said ailments. One morning, Alvin said to him, "I couldn't get any lather out of your toothpaste this morning. I couldn't."
Oh, God.
Yeah. True story. Tony Gale told me the story. So maybe Alvin Martin now has the old farmers in his mouth. I hope.
Isn't it funny? We've talked about all the anecdotes, but barely about the match. So we have to wait till the second.
There's just one more.
There's one more.
As the Fulham players come off the coach, who's there to meet them? Bobby Moore. Yeah, he's trying to psych them out right from the start. So he's saying,
as the West Ham. You mean the West Ham come off the coach?
Yeah, West Ham come off the coach.
Yeah. See, that's great, because that's dirty Paul, that is it. That's really well played, Bobby. I'll give him that one.
So he's saying, you're right. Any nerves there, Mervyn? It's a good day for you today, son. Trevor, that voice sounds a bit heavy. You're all right there, Trev. So he's trying to stack him out right from the start.
But no, fair enough.
So he's got a sense of humour. And you can see him as they're walking onto the pitch, in that glorious walk when they come out from the dressing rooms and they walk sort of half a circle round to the dugouts then, don't they, before they come on the pitch, kind of thing. You can see him sort of giving it a little bit of mouth to the West Ham players. Yeah, with a smile on his face. You can see him. It's obviously a bit of a psychological warfare, but it doesn't do him any good, obviously. And at the end of the day, arguably West Ham got lucky with both goals.
Well, Moore was worried all day about the nerves of his goalkeeper. He's worried all day about it. He's worried from the start. He's trying to G up.
That's the irony, because West Ham should have been worried about the nerves of their keeper, the youngest keeper in the league, as they were.
And this is a question that goes often in my mind. Peter Mellor was the Fulham goalkeeper. Yeah. A couple of years earlier, when Santos of Brazil come over, Peter Mellor saved a penalty from Pelé. Now, if you could choose, what would you choose? Would you A, save a penalty against Pelé, save one of Pelé's penalties, or B, play a blinder in the FA Cup final? If he could have his time again, would he have chosen the other one and let the penalty go in?
No, you can't do that, mate. You've got to save that penalty,
And I think, to be fair, I think it's clear that he's relatively unlucky for the first goal.
He is.
In the sense where it wasn't a terrible save. And it kind of feeds back to, I think, to the fact that we're talking about West Ham played a whippet at number 9 as opposed to, a giant tree. A big old number 9 is not getting there. to the rebound.
Yeah.
But Taylor
It
does.
was two quick little strikers, wasn't it? Because it was Billy Jennings.
Billy Jennings as well, playing off of. Yeah, exactly.
Who just come from Watford.
Yeah.
And Alan Taylor, who just come from Rochdale.
Yeah, exactly. So, and unfortunately, feeding back to the point you made earlier, Tim, and also highlighted the ambition of the club at the time. You know, it was great that they were part of the club and all that business, but that weren't over ambitious signings.
For someone you've had Jeff Hurst for years.
Exactly.
And,
yeah.
Now you got a fella from Rochdale and one from Watford.
And you talk about careers. Trevor Brooking staying through thin and thin. It's obviously something which I remain eternally grateful to him.
Can I tell you a Trevor Brooking story which involves Fulham? 1980, we very nearly had a genius Brazilian player in English football. His name was Paulo César Caju, Paulo César Lima. Played against England in 1970. He was a left winger, and he nearly joined Fulham in 1980. He regrets not joining it, not doing it now. He got pissed off at the time with the amount of tax he would have to pay, so he didn't do it. But while he was in town negotiating, he went to see a couple of games, and he went to see the Arsenal, and he couldn't believe the ability of Liam Brady. Just couldn't believe it. You know, he played with Gerson, and he's saying, they got a Gerson here at Arsenal. And he went to West Ham, and he couldn't believe Trevor Brooking. The class of Trevor Brooking. Now, this is a Brazilian World Cup winner, one of the legends of Brazilian football, and he's telling me, Trevor Brooking, just unbelievable. You know, the elegance.
Took ages for England to recognise his talent. Yeah. It was when he teamed up with Keegan that suddenly you saw the magic of the way it should be. Because
he wasn't quick, was he? You had to pair him with pace.
Exactly.
You couldn't play him wide either because he's not quick enough to play wide.
You used to have to let him stand where he wanted. And some of the greatest midfield football I ever saw was when we brought Liam Brady back from Italy. And he was still good. It's probably 30, 31. And I think he had 2 seasons with us. And it's just something else. The passing range was just incredible. But, yeah, so I think the second goal that Mellor lets in, which is a bad mistake, is surely a result of the half mistake he made for the first goal and is then punished. Have you ever seen a keeper nutmegged like that? I mean, it's the weirdest. He gets himself. He does what your goalies are meant to do. He's got his post covered, doesn't he? Yeah. And that's probably the first thing on his mind is going like, this is so. Taylor's nicked in. Taylor's got to find an angle, and there isn't really one to score from. And he's basically, I think, gripping the post. But what he isn't able to do quickly enough is to get low enough. And so he kind of tries to drop his knees on the ball, doesn't he? It's a really painful position for him to get into.
Yeah, it's painful to be nutmegged at the best of times. But,
yeah, totally, Dotun. Yeah, exactly.
No, it's genuinely a bit. In an FA Cup final, that's just humiliating, isn't it? But what does West Ham care? You played out the last few minutes just trying to wind down the clock as the American basketball players do. And you did quite well there. And then the celebrations.
Moore talks about that dreadful moment because he'd been at Wembley so many times when the police and that start coming around the side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Undertaker time.
The bell tolls. Yeah.
It's horrible, isn't it? But it's great for you lot. Do you remember much about that after the post-match celebrations and so on?
This is kind of back to where we started. You know where I was neck high watching England's youth schoolboys playing. Yeah. I was the back, just off the back of the goal, the other end from the goals.
Oh.
It's a long way back at the old Wembley.
Yeah.
It's a long way back at the old Wembley, and when you're standing, there's not a lot that you really are taking in of a game. You don't get the sound. You clearly don't get the action in the way that you'd want to if you were genuinely wanting to watch what the football was all about. And of course, therefore, I'm left with just a kind of broad memory of it. And do you know, I've talked about this a lot. There's in the same way, because Billy Bonds famously also says that whole cup final washed straight over him as well. And I think you put it in context, Tim. I reckon the moment he steps down off that coach and his heroes there to greet him and saying, best of luck, Dave Bonzo, but not too much. Or something along those lines. I think from that moment, he's kind of probably gone into some kind of autopilot.
Right.
Living in a different dimension, isn't he? One thing I remember from this game, I mean, apart from I did think that was very funny, the West Ham 3, Dad's Army 0. And David Coleman, commentator on this, and what an excellent commentary. If you watch the YouTube version of this, I mean, you know what I've forgotten about these great commentators of old is that they did it on their own. They didn't do it with a pundit. He was like commentating for 2 hours on his own. Okay, maybe half-time break, but otherwise it's like, 2 hours.
And not filling every second with interesting backstories and facts.
Well, yes,
a very popular contemporary take.
And not ducking out, importantly, not ducking out of the non-playing time that he still has to be on air, because remember, 15 minutes before kickoff he's on air telling us what's going on, etc., and giving us a sort of an aspect of the landscape, and then afterwards, of course, it takes forever to receive the cup, etc. But the other thing that I remember about this was hearing the West Ham fans singing Bubbles, but not singing Bubbles with the same vigor as it's been orchestrated, to have a response or to get a response now contemporarily. They were just like singing "I'm forever blowing bubbles," and when the denouement comes, which is "Fortune's always hiding," it was just like "Fortune's always hiding." I've looked everywhere, and you thought, "Wow, it's a difference." It's what 50 years or say it is 50 years, isn't it? But what a difference in the sound, in the way that the West Ham supporters embrace that song.
Bobby Moore in a white shirt. I don't know quite how much that's affected the kind of, the riotous celebrations. Whether it's teens with a little bit of melancholy, it could be the case. I obviously this is kind of back to the old Upton Park days, is when you're in a ground that holds about 30,000 people. And it is,
easier to invade the pitch, though.
It's easy and to be heard. It's Wembley's not a great place for that, unless the whole place is singing.
Yeah.
We were an end.
Yeah.
So it might have got lost,
Fair point. And of course, if you were within the sounds of Bow Bells over the next few days, I imagine there was a lot of singing and dancing and Mild Man's a Dustman going on.
Yeah, and of course, open top buses, which we couldn't get anywhere near to see. It was it was madness. But
I don't know what the point of those open top buses are if you can't get anywhere near the flipping players. What's the point of it? I suppose great aerial shots, and they'll remember it. It'll be a good day out for the players.
You've got to parade your cup around, haven't you? But
you do.
But you're right. But Tim, it's kind of back to the point that you made earlier. For us, from the West Ham point of view, we had to cling on to that side of the ailing ship that we were, and one of the reasons your fingernails were still there is we kind of nicked a cup because we weren't meant to get past Ipswich. That was Bobby Robson's. That was a strong Bobby.
They were on the up and up, weren't they, at the time?
Yeah.
They were coming force.
So we weren't meant to be there. We arrived, and Fulham still underdogs in that game. And again, back to your point, the game didn't rise to the occasion in the truest sense. But just because, in practical terms, the romantic version of that was Bobby Moore beating his old team while playing for a second division team.
Yeah, I still thought it was a good game and well worth watching if you've got time to look on the internet. The game is the FA Cup final, 1975, 3rd of May of 1975. And Mark, we can't let you go without looking at the charts of the day. You're a music man, aren't you? Yeah, indeed. Although they're not in the charts, I don't think
they're not even a twinkle in an eye.
Yeah, thank goodness for that. But unfortunately, Mud are. And I mean, I feel sorry for Buddy Holly. I definitely, my generation who
Come on, Dotun, this is one of your favourite rock and roll bands, Mud, aren't they?
Yeah, right.
You're saying you?
Yeah, firmly tongue in cheek. I must say, my missus is very good friends with the guitarist in Mud, who became a really successful producer and songwriter as well. I think she might have written
Of
some
dance music as well, wasn't it? He
yes,
really did.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, you can tell that he's the one that's not really a teddy boy in it, because his sort of draped suits were a little bit flared trouser bottomed.
Yes.
Was it Les Strong?
Earrings.
Was it Les Strong by any chance?
Les Gray. Les Strong, obviously.
Les Gray was a singer. Les Gray was a singer.
Let's remind ourselves, Les Strong invented acid jazz.
Yeah, let's keep them separate. But at number 2, After Mud has absolutely tortured us with their rendition of Buddy Holly's Oh Boy, which is a great rock and roll track by Buddy Holly, but they've turned it into some kind of like karaoke tune here. At number 2 is one of the great soul classics of all time, ballad-wise, would you not say?
Oh, it's Minnie Riperton, isn't it?
Yeah.
Loving You. I mean, what I really love about Loving You being number 2 in the pop charts in England in 1975 is that sentence doesn't exist in her own country. She's nowhere near pop or radio success in 1975 in America, because she's not being played. She won't be being played on white radio, so so she's an incredible talent. If you don't know her work, she's sang with everybody, but she's in a brilliant sort of old weird hippie band called Rotary Connection, and they play some very strange psychedelic-y Sly and the Family Stone territory music that she's part of. But also, I only found a record is that Maya Randolph, the actress and comedian, is her daughter.
Okay. Well, what a tune though.
Kamala Harris on Saturday Night Live. Yeah.
What a tune though, because even now today it's played. I go to parties. I mean, I know a lot of artists that do covers of this. I think Janet Kay does a cover of it.
Does Carol ever go at the notes?
No, I think it's Janet Kay that's gone there.
Janet could hit. It's a silly games level of octaves going on there, isn't there?
Well, it is about her voice, isn't it? Because it's a simple song, and sometimes the best songs are the simplest ones. I don't doubt that at all. But there's something that she does with her voice that makes it almost. It's like rainwater falling over you. You know. It's a beautiful song.
Performance. I mean, there's birds on it, isn't there? It's a really weird record.
I would have done without the birds once upon a time, but now I think the birds are essential to it. But it's 50 years old. Oh. It's unbelievable. Because
what do you think, Mark, about the general picture of black music, which is your field, isn't it, at this time? And one of the things that really strikes me is just how big Northern Soul is, which is such an English thing. You try explaining Northern Soul to people outside England, and it's very hard.
I told you before, it's back. It's back currently. You know, there's a current for a new generation, but it's back.
So, what do you make of the black music overall?
Right. So what you're seeing around 75 is it's an interesting mixture. You've got Tim and I talked about this earlier. It's not a great record, but the great Betty Wright is in the top 40. But a really overburdened disco tune. So what you've got is genuine new disco coming through in 75. I think Silver Convention are in there, Hamilton Territory and all that stuff.
Discotheques
and the Sexalettes. Disco's already kind of finding its various feet.
And KC and the Sunshine Band. And it was around this time.
Yeah.
And what you just referred to, Mark, Minnie Riperton not getting white radio. Like, obviously, for an English kid, that just doesn't make any sense at all.
No, we never did. We just didn't make that distinction.
And I remember seeing him talking about this at this time, talking about it was good being in England because, the music, it's just on the radio and it's the music, Where in the States, he found it hard to get a break originally, KC.
I was going to say, having worked in Los Angeles for music papers, the one thing you were struck with, and this is in the 90s, the one thing you were struck with is all the record companies are divided between, the record company and the black section of the record company. So, you had a president of the record company, then you had a president of the black section of the record company, and they used
they used R&B, didn't they?
Exactly. It was all kind of euphemisms, but it was racially divided. But what you just said, Tim, about how for an audience over here, they don't get it. They wouldn't get why Minnie Riperton wouldn't have been played in the United States. Well, the answer is staring you in the face at number 26, LaBelle. with Lady
Lady
Marmalade,
Marmalade.
because
Yeah.
this is what a black artist had to do to get through. Because remember, Patti LaBelle was already a soul star before she rocked it up with Nona Hendrix and the third woman whose name I always forget, rocked it up. And basically they had to dress up as if, you know, they were
Sci-fi.
a little bit sci-fi. And dare I say, the American equivalent of, in terms of outfits, you know, somebody else whose name is no longer to be mentioned as Gary Glitter here. You know, they were a little bit extraordinary, you know, camp and all this sort of stuff in their Lady Marmalade. And of course, they wouldn't want the comparison, certainly criminal-wise, because, you know, he has done time for his misdemeanors, and which they haven't. But LaBelle's Lady Marmalade, for me, was like a rock. They were a rock group with a rock tune. You know, I didn't think of that as like a disco tune or a.
It's a very good point. I don't think it was either. I think it kind of lives on its own. And back to and in terms of Howard Casey, it's the bit that I hadn't forgotten there. So Casey and the Sunshine Band are, of course, TK Records house band, and then they become the front of house, which is who Betty Wright would have used as her musicians.
Oh, right. Wow.
So they were all out of Miami. And that's where, and famously, whereas people, you would attribute the Love I Lost, which is Harold Melvin, the Blue Notes, as being the first ever official disco record because of Earl Young's drum pattern.
4 on the floor, yeah.
Exactly. Hughes Corporation's Rock the Boat, which came out of Miami, was released before, and is often now cited as being the precursor. It's not disco in the same way that a Philadelphia record is, but it's argued about the tempo. And you got, and in terms of Northern Soul, it's a really interesting point you make, Don. It's so, not only is it back throughout the Club of TV YouTube series that we make, which is basically two men in a basement in Savoy. Thank you very much. And I arguably, you two might be an obvious target audience because it is two gentlemen of a certain age in a basement in Savoy banging on about shoes and hats and whatnot. So, and we did an episode called Massive Strides, which was reflecting on the fact that trousers have got bigger of recent times.
Yeah.
For fellas, they've got a lot wider, and they've gone Northern Soul baggy, basically.
Right. And our bums have become, well, maybe it's just mine, but bigger, I was going to say. Listen, I know you got to go. It's an absolute pleasure having you join us to talk about the second time West Ham won the FA Cup, was it?
Yeah,
that's it.
As Tim pointed out, because I mean, that was the glory years of winning an FA Cup and winning a European Cup with us Cup. Then we win in '75, and then we had to wait till about last year. So,
3rd of May 1975, and we've been talking about the charts for that week as well. And
was it a good time to be 14, Mark? Just to close. Did you enjoy being 14 in 1975?
No, I hated it because I was still that guy. When I was getting to 15, 16, and I was starting to get into the soul scene, I was discovering that new look. I was having a short haircut. Everyone had a haircut like Alan Taylor.
Yeah. No, they had a haircut.
Such a horrible era.
They had a haircut like Bay City Rollers who at number 5.
Load of feather cuts. Feather cuts everywhere.
Bay City Rollers. Oh, by the way, big shout out for Susan Cadogan with Hurt So Good at number 4.
Indeed, I was nice hopefully, Mark, you just got 2 minutes. Because Dotun, what's the relationship between this, Susan Cadogan, and UK Lovers Rock? Where does one lead to the other, how does it work?
Very good question. Well, Lee Perry is in there in the middle of it, and if you hear some of Lee Perry's work with the original Wailers, some of Bob Marley's sweetest love songs like Kaya, which for Lee Perry was called, when they did it with Lee Perry, it was Turn Me On, Turn Me Loose, I think it was. Some of Bob Marley's sweetest love songs are with Lee Perry. Susan Cadogan is then mixed and produced by Lee Perry, who has got an influence now on UK Lovers Rock, because this is the one tune from Jamaica that all of us who went to youth clubs around 1975, 76, the generation that amongst the women would kick off Lovers Rock music. This is what we were listening to. Yeah.
So this is an important influence on the way that Lovers 100%, Rock then gets taken up. Right.
But what I was trying to say was Bob Marley is actually the link, you know, via, and Miss Queen of Lovers Rock is here. Yeah, okay. The Queen of Love's Rock just popped in. She didn't
Point
correct
of
me.
order, Mr. Chairman. Was it what he said?
No, it wasn't that. She didn't correct me at all. Anyway,
Right.
yeah, look, it's amazing having you on.
So
Let's do it again.
one final point, because I can't resist it. I was watching Clobbered yesterday, your latest one, and you talk about Steve Marriott in it.
Yeah.
And so the thing I don't understand is what happened to everyone in the 70s. It's just a fucking excrescence. The people in the 60s, they are so sharp. They are sharp. And you look at what happens to Marriott, even what happens to Ronnie Lane. You know, what on earth are you looking like? And this is what I've never understood, because people like us, you've got the whole, we've got a whole gamut to look back on. And we kind of plant our flag in a certain time and era, and we work within that. But at that time, everything's going forward all the time, isn't it? With a little bit of backwards looking as well, with mud and there's a look to the 50s. But what the fuck was going on in the 70s?
So
everyone looks terrible. The haircuts,
the die-hard modernist, a man for whom one hair has never been out of place on that head.
Do you know, for artists, they in the 60s, they went to a boutique, as it were, and they bought the only, copy of that shirt available to stop all the other artists from getting it. By the 70s, everything was available to everybody. You don't have the same uniqueness, if you're talking about
the whole aesthetic is different, isn't it? Where it had been sharp, now it just let it all hang out in the most,
I dare
horrible
tell
way.
you though that there's in certainly one of our Clubbed episodes, you'll find me sporting a collarless Grandad shirt with a little bit of neckerchief underneath. I Ronnie Laned it for that particular episode.
Exactly.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to mark you down a little bit in my book.
Yeah, I did sense disappointment in the
leave Ronnie Lane out of it. I'll tell you why. He cottoned on to. Kevin Rowland needs to thank Ronnie Lane for giving him the gypsy look, and arguably, no, you're not impressed with that. Arguably, David.
I hated it. I love the first X's. The second two Rye, I just thought they were ashamed.
Can I just point out that the very next episode of Clobbered will be celebrating the 105th anniversary of the button-down collar shirt, in which Exhibit A, I would guess, and in which we discuss at great length Mr. Kevin Rowland and the follow-up to 2 Rye, which was their Brooks Brothers album.
Don't Stand Me Down. And no one paid any attention. Everyone did stand it down. At least they look better than 2 Rye. This is the Peter Mellor question, isn't it? This is another version of the Peter Mellor question. Would you rather have great success looking like an idiot with 2 Rye, or everyone ignoring you looking sharp with Don't Stand Me Down?
I am Mr. dressed like I'm in on the waterfront, singing Gino all day long. I am not walking out in a Brooks Brothers suit.
Please invite me onto Clobbered when you decide to do some drain pipe stories. Yeah,
I think you should welcome the new podcast vision. Welcome the new podcast vision. Welcome the new podcast vision.
Mark, thanks for
more years. Thank you, boys. Nice to speak to you.
Tim, let's do it again soon.
Yeah, this time next week, same place
at the same time. Yeah.